with over 8 years experience in the immigration field. She is the founder of Atkinson Immigration Services, which is a boutique immigration firm located in Ontario. Shontel graduated from the University of Toronto with honors in international development and political science, and later graduated at the top of her class with honors after completing the Immigration Practitioner Program at the Academy of Learning Career College. At present, Shontel is an adjunct professor at the prestigious Queen's University in Ontario, where she instructs key modules of the Graduate Diploma in Immigration and Citizenship Law. She's also a CPD presenter and speaks on several immigration topics to professional and public audiences. She is the proud recipient of the Barbados Canada Association 2021 Barbados Independence Award for significant contribution to the Barbadian diaspora in Canada. As I say, Shontel, you remember Shontel from last year, she presented. And once again, we are delighted to have her back to present on the topic, a very pressing topic, pathways to understanding the Canadian work permit system. So Shontel, and of course, before Shontel comes, just to remind you what the general stated, please type your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen. So right now, over to you, Shontel, for part 2 of your presentation. Shontel?
Thank you so much, Council and Council General. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you again today, to share some valuable information on the pathways to understanding the Canadian work permit system. And today, primarily, I know that we all are really excited. We'll be looking at applying for work permits from outside Canada, and we'll be looking at the famous LMIA system that everybody is so usually concerned about. So first, we have our disclaimer. I just want to reiterate that this presentation is intended for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute providing professional advice or services. Since this presentation will be on, work permits and will be on the LMIA system, I will state that, by no ways this is any kind of recruitment efforts. This information is just given for informational purposes only. Now, today we'll be looking at a variety of topics concerning the labor market, extending our conversation from yesterday. We'll be looking at exploring the meaning of job offers, the LMIA process, different types of LMIAs, the alternatives to LMIAs, the in-demand occupations that we have in Canada, job search tools, job bank, and some of the information, we would have touched on yesterday lightly, but I want to really go into some specifics about the LMIAs today. And then of course, throughout, I will be able to answer any questions you may have. And then towards the end, we will have a question and answer segment as well. Now, I like to start with my map of Canada because I find that every day when I speak to people, persons are only concerned with the metropolitan cities in Canada, but there are other areas in Canada where job opportunities are. And when you're thinking about working in Canada, you have to have an open mind because, in a lot of metropolitan cities, we have, I don't want to say overcrowding, but the employment opportunities may not be as abundant as in the other more remote areas in Canada. And this is because everybody typically wants to be in the metropolitan cities that are multicultural, but sometimes to get those job opportunities and even better wages, we would have to venture out and, go into other provinces. Okay, so yesterday I touched on why working in Canada, why working in Canada is a good thing, is a good opportunity. So for those of us who weren't here yesterday, I'll just say that working in Canada has a very low employment rate compared to other developed countries. Canada ranks really high in modern technologies, So there's a lot of pathways and streams for persons in technological fields. You could always migrate with your family and your spouse and your children, which we spoke about yesterday. And Canada is very diverse. So they welcome persons of a variety of backgrounds, a variety of cultures. And as you're working, you'll see that you'll be intertwined with a lot of different persons. Canada is also ranked as one of the best countries in the world and is known to, have good opportunities and known to be a good place to raise your families. Now, before we get into work permits and LMIAs, I want us to acknowledge that there's some persons in Canada and who would come to Canada that would be exempt from needing a work permit. And these positions are positions that are not directly involved in the labor market, meaning that they're not going to be competing with Canadians or permanent residents, for work. So we have like athletes and coaches, we have like crew members that would come by planes, that will come on cruise ships, any emergency service providers, family members of foreign representatives, healthcare students, judges, referees, performing artists, public speakers, religious leaders, all these type persons, even students working off campus, as we would have covered yesterday, and students working on campus are able to work in Canada without a work permit because their study permit facilitates them to basically have work authorization without needing a physical work permit. So I will say that the Canadian labor market within itself it has two focal points. We have the temporary foreign worker program, which we're going to explore today, and a little bit about the international mobility program. So yesterday we learned all about open work permits and the opportunities to get these open work permits from inside Canada, especially students. And we're going to be focusing on the employer-specific work permits today, which are the most common, which are the work permits that you would need to have the involvement of an employer. So we're going to thoroughly explain what that means and the responsibilities that the employer has to have. So one of the first things that we would notice when we're on our job searching for Canada, we're looking for job opportunities, employers usually ask a lot of questions. And it's because the liability for employers with respect to the conditions that they have to meet and the requirements that they have to meet, and also the costs to having a temporary worker in Canada is a lot more than we would anticipate. So today we'll be looking at the employer's responsibilities and the labor market so that we could understand, the need for why employers are a little strict on, who they want to offer jobs to and etc. Now, as I said yesterday, and I'll repeat today, the most common type of work permits in the labor market would be employer-specific work permits. And the system has it this way, because all the open work permits that you would usually get are for significant benefit to Canada, meaning that the persons are already in Canada, they're already entwined in the Canadian labor market. So they already are students that are working here. They're already people that have spouses that are international students and workers. So these persons already have an invested interest in Canada. Now, employers that would want to hire workers from outside Canada, in those situations when employers extend job offers to workers in Canada, we call it an employer-specific work permit. So this work permit will have the name of the employer, and it would always have how long you can work in Canada, and it would have the location where you would work. So you would see certain terms used interchangeably, like employer-specific work permit, you'll see closed work permit, you'll see LMIA work permit. All of them mean the same thing. It usually involves the employer, and without a job offer from a Canadian employer, you're not able to get these particular types of work permits. Now, in terms of the meaning of a job offer, so I think this was one of the questions yesterday about, the job offer. What is meant by a job offer? So in Canada and in immigration, we would use the term job offer. Sometimes you will see the term valid job offer, and other times you will see the term genuine job offer. So loosely applied, these terms refer to a job offer that is extended by a Canadian employer, but was also approved by the Canadian government to basically give that foreign national the job. So basically having a job offer is not just, calling up an employer and having the employer agree to hire you, but it means that that employer has taken the next step to actually petition the government or do some kind of formal application process before the government to make sure that they get the approval to hire foreign nationals. And the reason for this is because in Canada, Canadians and permanent residents have priority. The last thing the government would want is to have a labor market issue on their hands where temporary workers come to Canada and get jobs, and Canadians and permanent residents are out of jobs, or there's like high unemployment rates. So in order to ensure the security for jobs for Canadians and permanent residents, they would encourage employers, to have any job offers they want to offer foreign nationals thoroughly vetted by the government first. And this is not only for the labor market security, but sometimes it could be in the best interest of the worker as well. And we will see how it works on to the advantage of the worker. But the Canadian system, I just want to point here that the Canadian system is based on that protection for Canadians and permanent residents. And how they look at it is that the government genuinely wants people to have a vested interest in moving to Canada permanently. Their objectives with respect to immigration law is permanent first, and then after permanent, then they address the temporary. So they don't want to have, retention issues where they have persons, coming to Canada and working for a short period and returning. They actually have a long-term goal of having more persons apply for permanent residence, because when persons are here longer, they're able to work in Canada, they're able to pay taxes, they're able to bring their family, it fuels the economy. So their attempts are not misguided in how strict they are. They just want to make sure that persons are, coming to Canada permanently. So with that being said, you can always take a look at our presentation that we had last year on the pathways to permanent residence in Canada, because sometimes moving to Canada permanently under a permanent resident stream might be a little easier than actually trying to get a job from an employer. So I'll just state that there. Now, in terms of the two pathways for employer-specific work permits, would be the labor market impact assessment pathway that is under the temporary foreign worker program. And this program is facilitated by a government department called Employment and Social Development Canada. And then we have an offer of employment stream, which we have jobs and occupations that are exempt from needing an LMIA. Exempt from needing an LMIA means that the government does not have to, the employer does not have to undergo the LMIA process, but the job offer still needs to be validated. So you can have a valid job offer, a genuine job offer that comes with an LMIA assessment that was positive, meaning that ESDC has approved that employer to hire that foreign worker. Or you could have a job offer, or a valid job offer, or a genuine job offer that is, approved by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, where there's no LMIA involved, but they still have to vet the job to make sure that the job is genuine. So as we go on, you will kind of understand why they have this invested interest in being so tedious. Now, in terms of the LMIA exemptions, now for my many years working in immigration, LMIAs, for me, when we approach the topics of LMIAs, sometimes it's best to understand who does not need an LMIA first, and then we would finally get the grip that everybody else needs an LMIA. So for the LMIA, which is the labor market impact assessment, as I said before, that particular process is the regular process for working in Canada. Like the first thing everybody knows, the first thing is that you would need an LMIA. But there's some people that are LMIA exempt and some occupations where employers don't need to get an LMIA. So we're going to explore those, and then we're going to understand that everybody else, apart from these persons, would need an LMIA. So you don't need an LMIA if you are from a country that is covered by an international agreement that facilitates for professionals, trades, and investors coming to Canada. So we have countries like, the US, Mexico, in agreement with Canada, which is called CUSMA, that was formerly known as NAFTA, like we may know it as NAFTA. We have GATS, we have the Canada-Chile agreement. We have agreements with Korea. We have agreements with a lot of different countries that have international agreements with Canada. And this facilitates the transfer of workers sometimes in professional fields, trades, and investors. But even this does not mean that they don't need a work permit. You could be LMIA exempt, but you will still need a work permit, meaning that these persons from these places would still need a work permit. So they have to be under those type of international agreements in order to facilitate that process. We also have LMIA exempt occupations for the provinces and territories that have agreements with the federal government in Canada. So in Canada, we have a two-tier government, meaning that we have the federal level of the government, which governs all over Canada. And then the government is broken down into provincial governments. So the provincial governments have their agreement with the federal government, and sometimes they have significant investment projects in those provinces. And we also have certain provinces that would have a need, and they would have a certain need for workers, and therefore those provinces would have a special agreement with the government, where in those provinces you wouldn't need an LMIA. So a lot of these provinces, for example, that you wouldn't need an LMIA for some jobs would be the Atlantic provinces. So our Atlantic provinces are Nova Scotia, we have Newfoundland and Labrador, we have New Brunswick, and we have the Prince Edward Islands. So those 4 provinces are called our Atlantic provinces. And if you were to explore those provinces and you were to go to those provincial websites, which is as simple as, you know, sticking them in the Google browser, and they will come up. If you put like Nova Scotia immigration, Nova Scotia immigration website would come up, and you would see their Atlantic immigration program. Now, the catch about these type programs, even though they are LMIA exempt, you would need to have an employer that is designated in those particular geographic areas. So you would have to do your research in seeing which employers are designated and actually seeking out those employers, because those employers are the only employers that would be able to hire persons, you know, without an LMIA. So that opportunity is not lost. It's a really good opportunity. A lot of people were able to take advantage of working in the Atlantic provinces, and they didn't need an LMIA by way of coming under that LMIA exemption. Now, another type of LMIA exemption is for significant benefit. So we have certain occupations that provide significant benefit to Canada. So we have, like, for example, self-employed engineers, we have creative and performing artists, sometimes intra-company transferees. Now, when we're looking at these occupations, what I realize about these occupations is that when they say significant benefit is not for the faint of heart. They're usually persons that are well-known, renowned, and they actually are able to set roots in Canada, where they could actually hire Canadians, or their skills and their training could be transferred into the Canadian labor market on a big scale. So for example, creative and performing artists, even intra-company transferees, like I get a lot of questions about persons, you know, working like in different regional areas in the Caribbean and in Barbados especially, that are working for Canadian companies, and they're wondering if it is simple as transferring from one company to the Canadian branch in Canada. We do have intra-company transferees programs that are facilitated under the LMIA exemption, but unfortunately, the occupation, the spots for that ICT, as we would call it, is only for executive persons in the company, managers, and persons that have specialized knowledge. When we're talking about specialized knowledge, we're speaking of persons that would have, like, say if you have a company of like 1,000 employees, only one person knows the particular key to a product that is unique for that particular business. So they're very, very tedious and meticulous in how they pick intra-company transferees. So even if you're coming from Barbados and you're looking to have a job opportunity within a Canadian company that's based in Barbados and also has a branch in Canada, they are going to view you as if you're coming from outside. So they're not going to view you as somebody that could be easily transferred. They're going to view you as someone that is coming from outside Canada, starting afresh, and more than likely you would not be LMIA exempt, you would need an LMIA. So then it would be up to the company in Canada if they want to actually have an LMIA for you. If you hold an executive position, if you hold a managerial position, or you have that specialized knowledge, then it is something that you could definitely explore in terms of coming under that intra-company transfer program. Now, another type of LMIA exemptions would be reciprocal employment. So employments that Canadians and permanent residents enjoy elsewhere in other countries as well. So we have countries, like I said, that have a lot of agreements with Canada. And the same way how persons want to come to Canada, Canadians want to go to other countries. And sometimes they take on positions like coaches and athletes, exchange professors, visiting lecturers in other countries. And so that is called reciprocal. So when those persons from those countries want to come to Canada, their positions are usually LMIA exempt, but they still need a work permit from the organization that they're going to be working from. No, jobs that are designated by the minister. So sometimes we have academics, researchers, guest lecturers, visiting professors, medical residents, and fellows, etc., that are designated by the minister, depending on the needs in Canada. So for example, like, within the last 2 years, COVID has been a hot topic. So there has been a lot of research going on in Canada, and I think we got our vaccine very recently. So for example, persons from other countries that are experts in their fields and they're, very well-renowned researchers and guest lecturers, sometimes they're able to come to Canada to work with certain organizations and institutions, and those positions are LMIA exempt. So we don't have to question the importance and the significant benefit of those positions, because that Canada will benefit on a big scale. So if they don't have that particular specialized labor or those particular persons in fields that they would need research in, they definitely seek outward, and then they make it easier for those persons to come to Canada by way of having that particular designation LMIA exempt. Now, charity and religious work is also under these LMIA exemptions. So persons that are, doing like charity work for different types of organizations, sometimes not-for-profit organizations, if they're doing religious work, like being a pastor, or if they are like a counselor within the church, in those type fields, they're also LMIA exempt. In this case, with charity and religious work, they can also work without a work permit. But if they want to get a work permit, they can get a work permit that will be LMIA exempt, but they will still get an employer-specific work permit, meaning that the employer still has to formally offer them a job that still has to be vetted by the government of Canada in order for them to work. And when they're working, that work permit is going to be employer specific. So it's going to have the details of that particular organization. So they don't have the flexibility of working for different employers in different places in Canada. And then, of course, yesterday we learned about our open work permit holders who are LMIA exempt, because, like, for example, the post-graduation work permit holders, spouses of students, spouses of workers, applicants who have a permanent resident application in process. If you have an open work permit that is completely unrestricted and open, you wouldn't need an LMIA. The employers would not, they would jump to hire you because, you don't need an LMIA. So the LMIA exempt process is usually under the International Mobility Program. And in this process, you could get open work permits like we discussed yesterday, or you can have employer-specific work permits. And if the employer does not need that LMIA to hire you because your job is LMIA exempt, they would submit an offer of employment, which you would also hear about. They would submit what we call an offer of employment to the government. And the branch of government that they're going to submit it to is the IRCC, which is Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. And IRCC would vet that particular job to make sure that it is a genuine job. They're going to look at the wages. They're going to look at the wages that you're being offered. They're going to look at the job responsibilities, because the employers are monitored even after the temporary workers come to Canada. So they have to maintain the program requirements when you're applying to come to Canada, and after you come to Canada and you're working, you still have to, the employers still have to meet those requirements. So it's kind of like they have to be registered, and the government would monitor them as the time goes on. So once the IRCC would approve that particular confirmation of employment, then the employer would give that individual a number, which is called an offer of employment number, and that number is used with the work permit. Now, if you apply for a work permit and you don't have an offer of employment number, meaning that you're LMIA exempt, or you don't have a valid LMIA, they're going to refuse the work permit, and they're going to say that the job offer is not genuine or not legitimate. So a lot of people would get refusals when they just apply for work permit, and the refusal letter will state that they don't meet the requirements of a work permit because there's no LMIA and there's no job offer, there's no offer of employment number. So when you apply for an LMIA as a person that is outside Canada, or even if you are inside Canada, but they see you as outside Canada like a visitor, immigration is going to be looking for a positive LMIA, or they're going to be looking for an offer of employment, or they're going to be looking to see if you are exempt and if you are eligible for open work permit, which is like the persons that we discussed yesterday, like students and spouses of workers and so on. So if you don't fall into any of those categories, the default practice that the default recourse that they're going to take is to refuse that work permit application, right? Because by law, they would need to have either of those things in order for you to successfully get that work permit. So the process for a person that is coming from outside Canada or a person that is inside Canada and viewed as if you're outside Canada. So how they look at it is a little, how immigration looks at it, I don't want to say it's a little weird. It's just that if you're inside Canada and you're applying for a work permit from inside Canada, you have to be a person that has a work permit already, has a study permit, has a permanent resident application in, has a refugee claim in, you know, those circumstances that we discussed yesterday. If you don't fall into any of those categories, by default, you're looked at as if you're outside Canada, even if you're physically in Canada. So if you travel to Canada and you're for 6 months and you feel like you need you want a work permit and you're applying, you want to undergo the process and they're asking if you're inside Canada, outside Canada, you know, they are going to look at your circumstances as if you're outside Canada. So when you're applying for an employer-specific work permit as a visitor or someone outside Canada, the first step is usually to receive a job offer from a Canadian employer. So those recruitment efforts are paramount in the sense that you have to look for a job from a Canadian employer. You have to make sure that that Canadian employer is legitimate, and we're going to discuss about that a little later on. And after you have received that job offer from the Canadian employer, the employer agreeing to hire you, then they're going to basically hold up their end of the bargain by actually applying to immigration for government approval for you as a worker. And you would know that they're serious by either undergoing that LMIA process or either submitting that offer of employment if you are exempt from needing an LMIA. There's no other way. So if they, tell you come to Canada and then we're going to sort it out later, that is illegal. They're not supposed to do that. They should be applying for that LMIA or submitting an offer of employment. If you have an open work permit, they're going to get excited because they don't need to apply for either. Now, once you have gotten your LMIA application approved, the offer of employment, they usually give you 6 months. So it has a validity of 6 months to apply for that work permit. And once you apply for that work permit, then you would get an approval for the work permit, by IRCC, and you would get it in the form of a letter, what we call an introduction letter. And with that introduction letter, then you can travel to Canada and they will physically give you the work permit at the port of entry. So at the airport, when you enter, you will get your work permit and you will, come into Canada and you'll be able to work as a worker. So these are the steps that, it takes to obtain that work permit. And for persons that are a little bit more, visual, the first step is to search for a job, get the agreement of the employer that they're going to hire you. When you're fully understanding of the process, like after we have this seminar, you would fully know what they need to do. The employer would then acquire that LMIA or that employment approval on your behalf. Once that LMIA or that employment approval is basically given by the government, then the applicant, you would apply for your work permit and then you would receive your approval letter and then you will arrive in Canada and receive your work permit. Now, before we go into the LMIA process and talking and basically speaking about the rigors of the LMIA, Consul General, I'll take this opportunity to see if anybody has any questions at this point about what we discussed so far.
Thank you, Shontel. Let me look through the questions to see what we have.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody says, John says, my wife and I plan to send our son to university in Canada. We're both professionals. She's a nurse. I am in financial services. We would like to move to Canada as a family. Should we have a job offer before we start the move process? But they put this question in before you had finished that part. So,
okay. So yes, they should have a job offer. I would say that is a lot of planning that will go into that. You're going to look for, like a province that would have a need for your particular skills. So I know offhand that Nova Scotia, for example, needs nurses. They're usually big with people in the medical field. And I think accountants is flexible. Accountants to go anywhere, I think. But yes, you will definitely, if you are looking to work, you should be undergoing the process and trying to finalize your plans before you leave. You can do it when you're in Canada, but the thing is that at that point when you're in Canada, you will be a visitor. And like I said, it is gonna be, they are gonna look at you as if you are a person applying from the outside. So in that case, you don't have the benefit of doing it from, where you are, is that you could plan properly and you could, see what the labor market has to offer before you up and leave. The disadvantage people have is that when they come, they can't go back because they already uproot themselves and come, and they haven't planned properly. So just know that in order to get jobs in Canada, you would need the cooperation of an employer. So that you should be looking for those opportunities before you leave, in my professional opinion.
okay, thank you, Shontel. There are a couple more questions. Jacqueline wants to know, how do you apply for permanent residence outside of Canada, from outside of Canada?
Okay.
So I figure, yeah, she may have to go to our permanent residence.
Yeah, I think, that was very thorough. So we could direct Jacqueline to our session last year, which was about permanent residence.
Okay, Jacqueline, I'll post the link in the chat for everybody to have. I did it yesterday. I'll do it again today. Somebody else is asking, what are the opportunities to teach in Canada? I'm an experienced teacher here in Barbados.
Okay. So the opportunities to teach, again, it varies. Education is something that is handled provincially. So it varies from province to province. So what I would say about teaching is that you need to, I've seen some research recently that says that, teachers are needed in Canada. But the thing about teaching in Canada is that even though you are an experienced teacher in Barbados, in a lot of these occupations in Canada, you still need to do extra schooling, extra training, and extra licensure in order to basically carry out your functions in that particular field. So I would say that that person would have to do their research in terms of seeing what particular province would be good and what particular province they want to settle in, and then gear their research and their plans towards that province. More than likely, depending on the situation, like I said before when I started, sometimes coming to Canada permanently as a permanent resident will be more beneficial, will be easier than trying to get a work permit. So a teacher is from the government, and the government usually has tons of Canadians on permanent residence that they could hire. So it's very unlikely that a provincial government is going to undertake an LMIA for a foreign worker to be a teacher. That is a process where the person would probably need to apply for permanent residence. And while they're applying for permanent residence, seek out the necessary paths that they need to take in terms of actually being a teacher, a licensed teacher in Canada.
Okay, we have a couple more, and I think we should just take a few more questions. So actually, good evening, High Commissioner Glenn Clark. He has joined us and he has a question. He's asking, he says it's a great presentation so far. And he says, what about doctors, vets, and dentists? Do these professionals need LMIAs as well?
Yes, everybody needs an LMIA. Yep. So
Okay.
we're going to go through the employer responsibilities for LMIA. But remember that LMIA is the normal process. So for somebody to not need an LMIA is unusual. It would mean that they're LMIA exempt, and they're basically coming under those list of persons that I discussed before. If you're not in those list of persons, you would need an LMIA, more than likely.
Okay, and somebody else is asking, how realistic is it to apply on the job sites and actually get a job in corporate Canada?
Okay, so we're going to discuss that. as we go on, as we go on.
All right. And just a couple more quick questions. Somebody says, I noted for some of the documents, they require copies to be notarized. What organization in Barbados would be acceptable for notarization?
So for notarization and organizations in Barbados, so usually in Barbados, we could have like, sometimes we could get documents notarized by Justice of Peace. I would say that a good notarization would come from a lawyer, right, in Barbados. When it comes to the documents, you could just take it to a lawyer and basically have them notarize those documents. So a lawyer should suffice.
Okay, just two more questions so we can finish up the questions that are here and we can get new ones next time. So Jabari asks, he says, I'm a cook and I'm looking to work in Canada and would like to apply for open permit. Is that possible?
Not unless the person studied in Canada, has a post-graduation work permit. If they have a spouse or a spouse that's an international student or work in Canada, or if they have a permanent resident application processing, then no.
Okay.
They would need to go the LMIA route.
All right, and the last question is, sorry, Keenan, you asked about an update for the seminar yesterday. Yes, we'll get that to you. And last question is, what are the options if employers are not keen to embark on the LMIA process to hire a foreign person?
The natural recourse would to take matters into your own hands, which would be seeking to study in Canada to get a work permit. Like I said, my opinion from yesterday has not changed with respect to the best ways to get a work permit in Canada. And I will say, I think most of the questions, are targeted to working in Canada, targeted on easy ways to work in Canada and where you should move in Canada. What I will say is that our immigration system is complicated. It's very complicated. We have a two-tier immigration system that is federal, meaning that, the federal government is in charge of all over Canada. And then we have it that is provincial. Under the provincial agreements, sometimes we have some provinces that have agreements with Canada that allows for persons to work in those provinces that would not require an LMIA. In order for you to take advantage of those opportunities, you have to be looking at a provinces, doing your research, looking at the province that you will be interested in moving, and looking at the specific immigration programs in those provinces. In those provinces may have immigration programs where you could apply and you would not need an LMIA, you could work. So like, for example, the person that said they're a cook, like to be a cook and to just land on an LMIA, like there are tons of cooks in Canada that are needed, right? And a cook is a field that, we have tons of, because of COVID, it has been slow, but we have a lot of persons that usually come to Canada and work as cooks. But there are a lot of provincial, like to work as a cook is not just getting a job that you have to consider. A cook is regulated in Canada. And that's another thing. A lot of our professions in Canada are heavily regulated. So it means that in order to work as a cook, for example, you would need to have like some kind of provincial license. So we have different tiers of licensing. So for example, like that cook, you have like, depending on what province you're moving in, you have a particular license. So like, for example, I'm in Ontario. If you're a cook in Ontario or you're a chef in Ontario, you have to have a particular license as a cook or as a chef. And if you move to Nova Scotia, that license is not going to work for Nova Scotia. Sometimes we have a Red Seal license where you could work all over Canada. So for somebody that is a cook or somebody that's in the trades that is looking to move to Canada, they should be looking into how to get licensed. And the way to do that is through the provinces, like by way of apprenticeships or by way of a study work program, where sometimes some colleges offer study work programs where you could study and work. And then they have like a joint program with the regulator, where after they have finished their program, they actually get the certification that they would need to work in their field. So again, it loops you back into that same cycle of studying in Canada and trying to get in that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Shontel. And I just want to make one quick plug. Somebody from our Barbados Liaison Service Department actually a couple of them are online with us. And Shirley has just reminded us, to the person who said about being a cook and wanting to come over to Canada, that you can register with the Labor Department in Barbados. So you can register with the ministry in Barbados as well, and go that route, because the Ministry of Labor in Barbados, they also seek out opportunities for Barbadians in Canada. And that would be one of the areas, especially within the hospitality area. So it's not only the farm labor program, but we also have the hospitality program as well. And so check with us at the consulate, because like I said, there's a whole department there called Barbados Liaison Service, and they could give you all the information. Or if you're in Barbados, speak to somebody at the Ministry of Labor, and they will be able to guide you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council General. I actually have like the information for the Ministry of Labor in this presentation as well, so the person could get the information there as well. Thank you. All right, so we're going to be talking about the LMIA and when an LMIA is needed. So an LMIA is the normal route in terms of working in Canada. Usually when you're working, like I said, if you are LMIA exempt or if you're getting an open work permit, you know, that is a little bit unique. But normally somebody that's looking to get a regular work permit, you know, they're looking at having an LMIA. So an LMIA, as I said before, is a labor market impact assessment. And the LMIA is going to confirm that there is a need for that temporary worker. And how they're going to know that there's a need for that temporary foreign worker is if there are no Canadians or no permanent residents available to do the job. So in terms of our labor market and the temporary foreign worker program, how it's conducted in Canada is that is put there to ensure the job market for Canadians and permanent residents, giving them that opportunity to apply first, to be able to have access for these jobs first. So that is why I usually advise persons to, you know, go the route of actually becoming a permanent resident, because once you're a permanent resident, you're included into that labor market assessment. So meaning that you are, you know, a permanent resident in Canada does not need to have a work permit or study permit. They're permanent residents, so they could work in Canada, study in Canada without any authorization. So they come under that umbrella of protection, you know, in terms of the government trying to ensure jobs for Canadians and permanent residents. So the LMIA is going to confirm that there's a need for the temporary worker, and that there are no Canadians and permanent residents who are available to do the job. Now, the employers who wish to hire the temporary workers, whether they're outside in Canada, they would need to get this LMIA unless the job is LMIA exempt or unless the person already has an open work permit. Only a Canadian employer could apply for an LMIA for the temporary worker. So the employer has to be the person to go forward and apply for this LMIA. A temporary worker cannot apply for the LMIA on behalf of themselves, because the LMIA is a labor market impact assessment. And in that assessment, they're going to evaluate the employer's work operations. So they're going to look at the jobs, they're going to look at the workplace, and they're going to vet the workplace to see if there is a need for that temporary worker. Okay, so the LMIA is a very complex process. Now, it is illegal for an employer to charge the foreign worker a fee for the LMIA process or to recover any fees from the foreign worker for LMIAs. So with that being said, we have had quite a couple scandals over the last several years with the LMIA, in the LMIA field and in working in Canada work permits. There are persons sometimes that are taken advantage of. So you need to know that if you're going to be working in Canada, you're coming regularly, you're going to need an LMIA. And if an employer is going to tell you that you need to pay them an exuberant amount of money for work opportunity, then that is a red flag, because it would mean that that particular operation is illegal. You shouldn't be paying for recruitment. You shouldn't be paying for a job. You shouldn't be paying for an LMIA. That is something that the expense for an LMIA is incurred by the employer. Now, the LMIA process and employer responsibilities. So LMIAs are processed through ESDC, which is Employment and Social Development Canada. We have general LMIAs, which are high wage or low wage LMIAs. And then we have specialized LMIAs that are geared to certain specialized areas. So like the global talent stream, foreign academics, or express entry, etc. So LMIAs are an objective assessment of the labor market. And basically their goal of the temporary foreign worker program is to fill skill and labor shortages in the labor market due to no Canadians and permanent residents being able to do those jobs. So it's very objective. The LMIA is not based on the temporary worker in particular. It's not based on your ability to do the job or how good you can do the job. It's really objective, and it's just based on the employer, and it's based on whether that employer needs to go through the whole process of hiring a temporary worker, or they could source that skill in Canada. So it's more about the employer than the worker. And that is why the employer has to go forward and apply for the LMIA. Sometimes I'll mention here that sometimes we even have LMIAs that are unnamed, what we call unnamed LMIAs, where like sometimes some employers like apply for several LMIAs at a particular time without even knowing who the temporary workers are going to be. They haven't approached any temporary workers yet. And then once they get these LMIAs approved, they're going to then, hire recruitment agencies in Canada to recruit on their behalf in other countries or within Canada to fill those LMIA spots. So the government of Canada knows that there is a labor market issue, especially in remote areas. And sometimes what they do is open particular agreements with the provinces when they know that it's really bad in certain provinces where they can't get any workers in particular areas, or retention, is really high. Retention in those areas are low. Sometimes what they would do is open these pockets of public policy programs to have give the employers the opportunity to hire workers that are LMIA exempt. But again, you have to be like gearing your research to a particular province, and you have to be, really looking out for these opportunities in these provinces. Now, in terms of the LMIAs and employers, what we have to understand when we're looking for jobs in Canada, we have to understand what employers have to go through in order to get an LMIA. And then we understand the LMIA process a little bit better in terms of the goals of the government, and why this LMIA is so important. So wages are a very important aspect of the LMIA applications, and wages determine the different streams that the employer is going to apply for these LMIAs. So we have our general LMIAs, as I said before, are high wage and low wage. So sometimes in Canada, we have low wage occupations, we have high wage occupations, and we have high wages and low wages. So how it goes is it varies from province to province. But when employers are looking to apply for an LMIA, a general LMIA that is, they're going to either do the high wage route or the low wage route, unless it is a specialized LMIA. If they're going the high wage route, they would have to be applying under the high wage stream. And that would mean that they would have to offer a wage that is higher than what we see here. So on this table, what we're looking at are the median hourly wages, which are also called the prevailing wages for each of the provinces and territories. So for LMIAs, it's based on the labor market, and they want to ensure Canadians and permanent residents get jobs. So we need to understand that. So like, for example, if we look at the province of Manitoba, which is the third province down, you see that for Manitoba, on the 2020 side, you will see that the wage is $21.60. It would mean that if an employer is hiring a worker and they're basically that wage that they're going to offer the worker is $25, it would mean that they're going to apply under the high wage stream. If they're going to offer a temporary worker a job and they're going to pay $15, that $15 is lower than that $21.60. So they're automatically going to be applying under the low wage stream. So I want us to remember that as we go on our discussions. Like, wages are very, very important. So the government forces the employers to pay a certain wage so that it's attractive to Canadians and permanent residents. So they could be scrutinized for offering a job because the wage is too low. So if the wage is too low, their automatic opinion is that Canadians and permanent residents are not taking that job because the wage is too low. So what they do is they tell the employer they're going to refuse the LMIA, and they need to increase their wage so that Canadians and permanent residents will find the job more attractive. And that is the reality of the LMIA applications. So in terms of the general requirements, the general program requirements for LMIAs, they basically look out for the Canadians and permanent residents and finding employment. And they also look out for the temporary workers as well. So our general requirements are the processing fees. We have third parties. They look at the business legitimacy. If you're applying for high wage LMIA, you need a transition plan, and we're going to look at that soon. If you're submitting a LMIA under the low wage stream, there is a cap. If they're always recruitment, so employers always have to apply the positions all over Canada to give Canadians and permanent residents the opportunity to apply. In terms of wages, they scrutinize the wages. You need to be offering a high enough wage. They look at the job duties of the worker, the working conditions in the company, workplace safety, the language of the work, and whether they're what we call unionized positions. So whether there's a collective agreement with a union that the employers need to uphold. So the LMIA program is very extensive and they monitor, like it's a lot of micromanaging. So a lot of employers sometimes, you could see as we go on, you will kind of understand a little bit more. Okay. So in terms of the first general requirement, the processing fee. Now, the first thing is that employers have to pay 1,000 Canadian dollars for each position that they want to apply for an LMIA. Okay, and this particular money, as I said, it cannot be paid by the temporary worker, and it cannot be recovered from the temporary worker. So it's illegal, and an employer could get into a lot of trouble by indicating to the temporary worker that they need to pay this $1,000 for that position. So if you can imagine, if an employer needs to get 20 LMIAs for their company, they have to pay the government $1,000 each for those LMIAs. Now, then there are additional fees and costs for lawyers and consultants that are doing processing LMIAs, and LMIAs they have a very high market rate. So for some companies in Canada to do one LMIA is like 10,000 Canadian dollars just for the paperwork. Like the paperwork for LMIAs are very, very extensive, and they're very, very stressful for some lawyers and consultants, and they charge a lot. So $10,000 would be on the lower end of LMIAs, and sometimes they could go like $60,000 depending on the amount of LMIAs that some companies have to apply for, and depend on the extent of the LMIAs and how big the company is. Now, we also have transportation costs to consider. So in terms of transportation, I don't know if many people know that, but when an employer is offering a temporary worker a position in their company and they have done an LMIA, automatically they have to upkeep the program requirements, and part of those program requirements are to cover the transportation costs for the worker to get to Canada. So they have to embed it into the LMIA process, is that they have to actually get you to Canada in order to work for them, and then housing. So they don't have to pay for your housing, but they do have to make sure that the wages that they're offering you is affordable for you to pay for housing. So they have to do their research beforehand to make sure that you're going to be living in an area where the wage that they're offering you is going to be able to pay for your housing. And the ESDC, who's processing the LMIA, is going to be asking for the information of where the temporary worker is going to be housed or where you're going to be living. So they want to see that the employers are doing that research. And then third parties, like we can have usually they could have lawyers and consultants prepare the application and apply, or sometimes they can have family friends, they could do it themselves. They could use a not-for-profit organization or religious organization to process the LMIAs. But because LMIAs are so tedious, usually they seek out the services of a consultant or lawyer to handle these LMIAs. Now, another thing that the government does is look at the business legitimacy. So employer compliance for the government itself is embedded into the LMIA process. So ESDC has to evaluate whether the job offer and the business opportunities are genuine, and they do this through the LMIA process. So they look to see if the company has any past compliance issues, meaning that they have gotten into any trouble with temporary workers before. Like, for example, over the past 2 years, we have had a lot of companies that got into a lot of complaints issues just by COVID protocols alone, by breaking the Quarantine Act or breaking the Emergency Preparedness Act as it relates to COVID, with the quarantine of workers, with giving people time to recover from COVID symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes these issues, cause employers to have to pay huge monetary funds to the government, or sometimes they're banned from hiring any temporary workers. So sometimes you might be looking for jobs, and the reality is that employers could be blacklisted and banned from hiring under the temporary foreign worker program, offering any temporary workers jobs. Now, for the business legitimacy, they're also going to look to see if the employer can fulfill the terms of the job offer. So they're going to look to see if the employer could pay the necessary wages to that worker. So they look at the business, they look at your business details and your documents from the government. So they look at your tax documents, your payroll. They scrutinize everything to see what you're paying your workers that are currently working for you, what you're offering this temporary worker, and they want to see that the employer can actually fulfill the terms of the job offer. So if they look at the profits of the business and the operations of the business, and they see that the business is not that profitable, then they could question the ability of the employer to actually fulfill those terms of the job offer. Because when you offer a job to a temporary worker, the employer has to assure the government that they're going to be in business for a certain period of time. So they can't offer the job for the temporary worker today and then go to business tomorrow. Like, they have to be in business for a certain period of time to fulfill the commitments of that job offer. They also look to see if the business is providing a good service in Canada. So if the business is a profitable business, if it is a business that is, renowned, and don't get me wrong, like, your business could be any size, but they want to see if that business is providing a good service in Canada, if it's a growing business, and if it is justified that that person is going to need a temporary worker and there are no Canadians and permanent residents to fill that job. They're also looking to see if the employment that the employer, if the employment that the employer is offering that temporary worker is consistent with the needs of the business. So if you have like a law firm and then you're offering a job to a plumber, then that raises a red flag, right? And the reality is that LMIAs are so rigorous. When you have LMIAs, and you have employers that are actually willing to do LMIAs for particular persons, sometimes it's for persons that they know of. Like, for example, you're from Barbados, there's a Barbadian employer in Canada that has a business, and they heard about your skills, and they personally think that you would benefit their business by your skills, or they saw you in action and they want to extend an LMIA. So some LMIAs and some applications for the LMIAs are persons that, could vouch for that particular worker, and could vouch for the person and knows that the person is gonna do a good job. Okay, so they want to make sure that you're offering that employment that is consistent with the needs of your business, and that is very important. Now, for high wage LMIAs, as I would have said, to remember the table that we had before about the transition, about the high wage LMIAs. So employers, if they are charging a wage that is higher than the provincial median wage, what will happen is that they have to submit within that LMIA a transition plan. So when I first heard about the transition plan, I was very surprised, in my studies and in my practice, but the transition plans are very detailed. So a transition plan, first of all, is mandatory for positions that are high wage, okay? And you can imagine, they're thinking, if temporary workers are getting these high wages, we need to get these persons transitioned to Canadians, or to permanent residents, or we need to get permanent residents in these positions. So that is their thinking. So the employers are supposed to describe certain activities that they're going to undertake to recruit, retain, and train Canadians and permanent residents. So in those transition plans are sometimes a plan as to how the employer is going to transition you as a temporary worker to permanent resident, or how they're going to get your skills that you have come to work for their company, the skills which are a shortage in Canada, how we're going to train Canadians, or how you're going to present those skills in order to retain Canadians and permanent residents in those jobs. So those transition plans have to be in those LMIAs, and they have to basically show that the employers over time are going to reduce their reliance on having temporary workers come from overseas. So it's not to say that an employer could have an LMIA for a couple of years and continue having LMIAs. the government puts pressure on them sometimes to actually have those workers transition to permanent residence and have those workers or give those jobs to permanent residents and Canadians. And as we go on and we look at the specialized LMIAs, you'll see how they're able to do this. So the employers have to report on the results of the commitment of these transition plans. So like if they apply for an LMIA this year, by next year, they have to show the results of that transition plan so that the government is satisfied that they actually did put in those activities that they had in those transition plans. Now for low wage LMIAs, on the other hand, so if they're offering a wage that is lower than the median wage that we saw, for low wage there are no transition plans, but instead of having a transition plan, the employers have a cap. So there's either a 20% cap or 10% cap that is calculated, meaning that they could only hire a certain amount of temporary workers as per their Canadian and permanent resident workforce. So in these LMIAs, they have to usually put how many workers they have that are temporary, and they have to indicate how many workers that are Canadian and permanent resident, and the government calculates a particular cap, or the employers have to calculate this cap, and they cannot go over that cap when they're offering jobs to these temporary workers. So it's very meticulous, and they have to make sure that they're keeping up with this cap. So prior to June 20th, 2014, if an employer hired temporary workers, their cap is 20%. So it gives them time to transition to a Canadian workforce. And the whole principle is that they were reliant on the temporary foreign worker program before. So meaning that they have a need for temporary workers, so they give them a longer time. And then for persons that did not hire any foreign workers before June 20th, 2014, they have a 10% cap, okay? So these caps are something that they take very seriously. And recruitment, I think that recruitment is the program requirement that is close to home in terms of really understanding how the LMIA system works. So for recruitment, employers have to advertise on Job Bank, on the government's Job Bank. And we're going to explore the Job Bank website in a little bit. But Job Bank, when you're looking for jobs in Canada, you're going to want to look at our Job Bank, because Job Bank is by the government. And to show you how strict they are, employers can use other sites to advertise when they're applying for LMIAs, but they must use Job Bank. And the reason why they use Job Bank is because they're registered in Job Bank, they put their information. Job Bank is the government, so they have a portal, or they have a profile on Job Bank, and the government can actually see how many people are visiting those job ads and how many people are applying to those job ads. So if the employers, advertise on Job Bank and 100 people went on the job ad and they applied, the government knows who applied, the government knows, exactly what is going on in that Job Bank. So even if they post those jobs on other sites and they report to the government that only 20 people have applied for the job or only 20 people visited the ad, then the government is a red flag, right? So on Job Bank, they're able to closely monitor employers. Now, they have to advertise on the Job Bank, and they also have to advertise. They have to use 2 additional methods of recruitment. So they could use newspapers, they could use other job sites, but the advertisements have to be national in scope. So they're usually all over Canada, and the Canadians and permanent residents have to have the capacity to apply for these jobs and work locations all across Canada. So their rationale is that if you have a job that is available in British Columbia and somebody's interested in that job and they're living in Ontario, you should be able to accommodate, right? Like you have to give them the option to, migrate. So you can't put in your job ad, only people in British Columbia allowed. You have to give persons the opportunity to, be able to see these jobs advertised nationally to decide if they want to relocate to a different province in order to undertake these jobs. Now, employers have a particular period in time that they have to advertise these jobs. So they have to advertise these jobs within 3 months before applying for the LMIA process. And the job ads have to be running for like four consecutive weeks within those 3 months, right? And while the LMIA is processing, one of the job ads, which is usually job bank. It could be anyone, but most employers use job bank, to keep that ad running while the LMIA is being processed. So even while they're looking at the LMIA application for the temporary worker and they're processing, they still want to keep hope that the employer can find Canadians and permanent residents. So I hope by now we could understand that the LMIA system is more of a deterrent than an encouragement to hire temporary workers. And that is just me saying it frankly. So the employers have to go through so much and they have to put so much into these LMIA applications at the whim that the government could just refuse them. And it is a deterrent. The hope is that while they're going through this process and they're going through this LMIA process persistently to hire a temporary worker, that they can find a Canadian or permanent resident that they can offer the job to instead. So with somebody from the outside that's looking into coming to Canada, sometimes you have to take matters in your own hands by looking for ways that you could get into Canada without undergoing the involvement of that employer. So the job advertisements have to have a certain criteria as well. So when you're looking for jobs, you're looking for jobs to see if there are jobs advertising for LMIAs or if the employers are open for LMIAs. You're looking for job ads that are going to have all the information, right? So sometimes some people, approach me with, flyers or some kind of links that they have going around the internet, and sometimes they're very ambiguous and they don't have enough details. But if it's something that is going to be legit and it's something that is going to be a good opportunity, they're always going to have all the information and they're always going to point you to the appropriate government website where you could actually see it from the government itself. So these job advertisements are going to have the company operating name, business address, the title of the position that is being offered, the job duties, the terms of employment, the language the work is going to be in, the wages, definitely they have to have the wages, any benefits that are offered, the locations, the contact information of the business, the skills and requirements that you're going to need for that job, including education and work experience. Now, in terms of job bank, here I have 2 samples of ads that will be on job bank. I don't have the full ad, but I have what you'll be looking for at the bottom of job bank, because I think job bank, you can look on Indeed and you can look at other job sites as well, but some employers post in more than one place, right? So you could see a job and it could be posted on job bank, it could be posted on Indeed. But when you're looking at jobs, some employers, like if we look at the particular picture, right, that is on the left side, you will see that at the bottom it says who can apply for this job. It says the employer accepts applications from Canadian citizens and permanent residents of Canada and other candidates with or without a valid Canadian work permit. So that means that it's probably a labor shortage and the employer is desperately looking for someone, right? They definitely want somebody, whether they're Canadian and permanent resident, they have them first, and then you can have other candidates with or without a valid Canadian work permit. So if you have a valid Canadian work permit, you could apply. If you don't have a valid Canadian work permit, it means that the employer may be open for applying for an LMIA for you. Now, on the right side, we have another type of notice on the job bank ads. It says who can apply for this job, and it said only apply for this job if you are a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada, if you have a valid Canadian work permit. If you are not authorized to work in Canada, do not apply. The employer will not respond to your application. So that means the employer has no interest in applying for an LMIA. So you're gonna start with job bank first, which is the first, site that you're gonna, look at when you're looking for jobs in Canada. And these are the notices that you're gonna be looking at the bottom to see who's interested in, who's open to hiring temporary workers and who's not open. Because if you go with the employer to the right, you will be wasting your time because they already know of the process, they already know of the rigors, and they're not interested in hiring a temporary worker. Now, in terms of the wages that are being offered for these type jobs, the employers, like I said, the wages for these jobs are vetted very carefully. The wages that the employers have to offer temporary workers have to be similar to the wages that they're paying Canadians and permanent resident employees in the same job and work location. So this is where we see the protection of the worker comes in. So an employer can't just decide to hire a temporary worker because they could pay them a cheaper wage. The wage is vetted, and they have to make sure that the wage is going to be at par with the Canadians or permanent residents in that same job and in that same work location and having the same skills. They also have to, sometimes they have to pay the wage that is the median wage on the job, right? So in different provinces, we have different wage requirements, and you always have to make sure that you're paying the median wage. When they're applying for LMIA, the government puts pressure on them to offer a wage that is the median wage, which is also the prevailing wage or higher, okay? And they have to offer a wage that is within the wage range that is paid to employees hired for the same job and work location and with the same skills and years of experience. So with that being said, it makes sure that temporary workers are not taken advantage of, in the sense that the employer is trying to lowball them into offering a cheaper wage to cut their production costs or to cut their costs and raise their profits. They're very, very invested in making sure that the wage is a fair wage. And then on top of that, they want the wage to be a competitive wage, because a competitive wage would mean that more than likely Canadians and permanent residents are going to apply for these jobs. So how they look at the wages, and everybody has access to the information. So the same way how I'm able to pull it up here, you could always go on the government's job bank website, the same site that you're going to be looking for jobs, and you could just go under the occupation and wages, and you could always look to see the type of occupation and the wages that are being offered for that occupation. So here is an example of accountants. They just randomly pick accountants, and the province is British Columbia. So as we can see, we have different regions. All these regions on the far left are regions in British Columbia. And we have three averages of wages, three ranges of wages. We have low, we have median, and we have high. When an employer is applying for an LMIA, the pressure is on that employer to offer a wage that is the median wage, median or higher. So it means, like, for an accountant in, like, say, the North Coast region, you see that the low is $20. You see that the low is $20. You see that the median is $29.59. And you see that the high is $48.72 per hour. So it would mean that if an employer applies for an LMIA and they decide that they're going to pay the worker $17, they might be comfortable with this $17. But when the government looks at their business legitimacy and looks at what their business is making, the government might say, well, this is an unreasonable wage. You should be paying a higher wage, because if you pay a higher wage, the Canadians will more than likely apply. So they have to make sure that they're paying the wage that is within the workers that they currently have working for them, or they have to make sure that they're paying at least the prevailing wage, which is the median wage here, or higher. Any wage that is lower, the government can put some pressure on them to raise the wage. So sometimes the pressure would not be, it wouldn't be too bad, in the sense that if your business is not making a certain amount, they wouldn't expect that you pay somebody like $48, but they do want you to be having a competitive wage. So these are the type of obstacles that are on employers sometimes with respect to when they're considering whether to hire a temporary worker or not. So this is for accountants. And the next example I have is for occupations in food and beverage services. And again, I randomly picked that, food and beverage services. And this is in the Ontario region. So as you can see, in Ontario region, if we look in Toronto here, which is two up from the bottom, we have one up from the bottom, sorry, we have the low in $15, we have median $15, and we have high $23. So it means that if an employer, is offering like $17, $18, they're not going to get that too much of pressure. But if they're going to be offering anything less than that, it would be a problem. Okay. Now, the job duties and working conditions. Temporary workers, they have to ensure that temporary workers, and sorry, before I go into the job duties, I'm thinking that probably persons might have questions about the wages and about recruitment. Consul General, are there any questions, or should I just proceed?
There are a few questions, but they're not. Let me see. Do I have anything that's specific to that? Not really. I just have a comment. I have a comment that I want to make here. Cassie says it is her understanding that notarization can only be done by a notary public, which is through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or so. That's a comment Cassie made to the earlier question about notarizing, having things notarized. And
Okay.
And Camelia had asked where would she find an employer with an LMIA, but that was earlier before you had gone through the full bit of information here. So, and somebody else was asking for if you could recommend recruitment agencies that hire with the unclassified LMIA, they said. Can you recommend some of these recruitment agencies that hire with the unclassified LMIA?
I don't know of, not that I know of recruitment agencies, but recruitment agencies that are specializing in LMIAs, they don't broadcast it. That is something you have to actually seek out these recruitment agencies in Canada, and you have to find out from them, like if they do LMIAs.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any recommendations for direct recruitment agencies.
Okay, and the last question I have here is Maxwell was asking if some employers can have pre-approved LMIAs.
Pre-approved, yes, they can. So we call them we call them unnamed LMIAs. So some employers can have pre-approved LMIAs, and then they're just looking for temporary workers to fill those positions. So yes, that is very possible as well.
Okay, yeah, you can continue because that's it for the questions that I've seen so far.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so in terms of the LMIA general program requirements, again, we have job duties and working conditions. So we have, in terms of job duties and working conditions, temporary foreign workers must only perform duties that are corresponding to the occupation that they were hired for. So it's a violation to have temporary workers do other duties or extended duties beyond what they were hired for. And the Canadian law protects all workers in Canada, including temporary foreign workers. And the exploitation of temporary foreign workers is considered a violation of Canadian laws and human rights. So embedded into the LMIA process are these safeguards, along with employment standards in the provinces. So they monitor like the hours of work, compensation, the working conditions, and how you have the term, how you terminate employment. And every province or territory has a ministry of labor that deals with employment standards. Now, in terms of workplace safety, which is one of the requirements as well, temporary workers are to be covered from provincial or territorial workplace safety insurance providers, and especially when they're required by law. And if employers want to seek private plans, they have to choose a plan that is better or at the same level of compensation that is offered by the province or territory. So even the plans, the safety plans and the insurance plans, are monitored. And all employees on the work site are to be covered by the same provider. So it's not that the temporary workers are covered by someone and then the employees are covered by the other Canadian or permanent resident employees that were there prior are covered by another company. Everybody has to be covered under the same company. Now, the language of work, so the jobs are English and French are the only languages that they can identify in the job recruitment or the LMIA application and the advertisement. And if another language is essential for the job, the employers have to provide justification on that particular application. And unionized positions, like we have a lot of unions in Canada that have collective agreements. So the employers have to advertise, they have to make sure that they advertise and offer the same wage rates to those in those collective agreements under those unions, and they have to offer the temporary foreign worker the same conditions as the Canadians and permanent residents. And they have to submit, if it is a unionized position, they actually have to submit that collective bargaining agreement on the wage structure with the LMIA. And when they're hiring temporary workers, it can't affect current or non or unforeseeable or foreseeable labor disputes in the workplace. So they can't hire temporary workers when there's a dispute happening to cover workers that are striking, or workers that are standing in solidarity against something going on at the workplace. And for temporary workers, they have the same rights as Canadians and permanent residents. So they can be involved in those processes as well, and they should be protected, from any kind of recourse, like the employers firing them or anything like that. With respect to all of those things are embedded into the program requirements for LMIAs. Now we have some specialized LMIAs. So we have LMIAs under the global talent stream, which is for unique and specialized skills. So persons that are in like computer, IT, technological advancement areas, STEM. We have like ICTs, like persons that are really specialized in their knowledge. And on that level, they can seek employers that are looking to have LMIAs that are offering LMIAs in those specialized streams. And sometimes for global talent streams, they benefit from a faster processing time. So sometimes after the LMIA is processed, the work permit could be granted within 2 weeks of applying. But again, those positions are heavily vetted by the government, because the employers have to offer a certain amount in salary. So for some of these positions under the global talent stream, the employers could offer a wage that is equivalent of an annual salary that is equivalent of no less than sometimes 80,000 Canadian. So it's really a really specialized area. And then we have academics. So sometimes we have foreign academics, researchers, etc., that are not covered under the LMIA exemptions that employers could submit LMIAs for. We have agricultural LMIAs, caregivers. So we have to understand that with caregivers, some programs in Canada are LMIA exempt with respect to caregivers, but whether you're going under the LMIA stream or you're going LMIA exempt, you will need, they're still going to vet the job offer, meaning that they're still going to look into the system to see if that job offer if you're offering a fair wage. And persons that are hiring caregivers in Canada are looked at as employers. So it would mean that they have to get a business number from the government. They have to get a business number from the government, and they also have to, the government looks at them. They have to make sure that collectively as a family that they could actually support and pay for the wage of that caregiver. So for the caregiver, like how we looked at Job Bank, and they have different wages for caregivers, there are different ranges of the wages, and they have to make sure that they're offering a median to high wage for these caregivers. We have positions in Quebec, that basically, you can have specialized LMIAs for that as well. And then we have express entry LMIAs that go with express entry, which is our most popular permanent residence program in Canada. Now for express entry, I just want to talk a little bit about express entry because it's one of the more prominent specialized LMIAs. And the whole point of this LMIA for express entry is to support a permanent resident visa application under that express entry system. So persons that may be thinking about applying for permanent residence directly, and they actually, while they're applying for permanent residence, at the same time, simultaneously, they're looking for jobs at the same time, and they come across an employer that they have had discussions with and is willing to do an LMIA. Sometimes employers may flat out ask you if you're applying for permanent residence. And the reason is that they may more want to support a permanent resident application rather than apply for an LMIA for you to just work in Canada. And this is because employers, when you're applying for permanent residence under express entry and you have your express entry profile in and you're actually, a candidate for express entry, employers are exempt from paying the government processing fees. So it's a way for them to pay that 1,000 Canadian dollars. They don't have to pay that, providing that the worker comes to Canada after they have gotten their permanent resident approval. So if the worker comes to Canada before and they're actually entering into the labor market, the employer would then have to pay the $1,000. But as long as it's only to support a permanent resident visa application, then the employers don't have to pay the government fees. So as I said before, the LMIA system is more of a deterrent and is more as an incentive to encourage employers to have persons transition to permanent residence. And that is one of the reasons, that is where we're able to see it played out, because the government, once they are supporting that permanent resident application, they don't have to pay those processing fees. So sometimes employers would more rather do the LMIA. They still have to recruit and do everything else, but they don't have to pay a government processing fee for the government to process it. And the government does take into consideration that the person is applying for permanent residence. So I think it's a leg up in that sense. And when we're looking at the permanent resident process, like if we were to go back to our presentation we had last year on permanent residence, for individuals that are applying under the express entry, it is a point-based system. And when you get an LMIA that is to support your permanent resident application, you actually get points that could benefit you for permanent residence. So you could get 50 additional points, or you could get 200 points in addition to whatever points you would have gotten on the express entry system for permanent residence, if you have that type of LMIA. And the job offers that the employers have to offer have to be for at least 1 year after the applicant becomes a permanent resident of Canada, right? So the job offer has to be for a long enough time, and it has to be given. It can't be just a short job offer to facilitate the LMIA process. The employer, part of that application, they're going to have to be showing that that temporary worker is a genuine worker, and that worker is actually wants to, they're actually going to have that worker to work in that job beyond becoming a permanent resident. Now we have the job skill levels in Canada again. This table is familiar. We had it yesterday. And I just want to reiterate that not every job in Canada automatically allows you to get permanent residence. The most popular permanent resident program in Canada is Express Entry, which is for our economic immigrants. And that Express Entry system only accommodates for jobs that are skill level 0, A, and B. So even if you get a job of a lesser, even if you got an LMIA, you got a job, and your skill level is C or D, in terms of the skill levels on this chart, you will, sometimes it's a little harder to get permanent residence. So you might still be stuck, in the sense that when you're getting jobs, you want to make sure if you're going to apply for express entry, you're going to apply for the economic classes, that you're getting jobs in skill levels 0, A, and B, which is 0, A, or B, which is more professional type jobs. If you are doing skill level C, or you're doing skill level D, like if you're offered a job in an LMIA in a skill level C or D, which would be a job that is, just requiring secondary school education or on the job training, you would have to make sure that you're applying in a province that has flexible provincial programs, because sometimes in the programs for the provinces, they're not as stringent as the federal programs, meaning that they do accept and provide opportunities for people of lower skill levels like C and D to apply for permanent residence. But for express entry and a lot of federal economic programs, you're looking at skill level 0, you're looking at skill levels A, and you're looking at skill levels B. Now, applying for work authorization in Canada in general is pretty straightforward. Like, we know by now that you need to get your LMIA unless you're LMIA exempt. And there's some standard things, as we would have discussed yesterday, that you need to make sure that you have in check when you're applying for work permit in general, right? So after the LMIA or getting the offer of employment is just the first step, but then you still have to get a permanent you still have to get that work permit. So just because a person has a positive LMIA or just because they have an offer of employment that was approved, it doesn't mean that nothing else could go wrong with the application. They could apply for the work permit and it could be refused if there's any red flags on that particular file. So you have to make sure that immigration is confident that you're going to leave Canada at the end of your stay. You may still have to show that you have funds to take care of yourself and your family in Canada, that you obey the law, you don't have any criminal activity, you're no danger to their security. If you're going to be in an occupation that is in direct contact with the vulnerable population, like persons with high medical needs or children, you will need to do a medical exam. If you have to make sure that you're working for an employer that is not compliant, because if an employer is up for a review, or if they have violated any laws and they're up for any kind of compliance issues, it could affect your LMIA, or even if you have gotten the LMIA, it could affect your work permit. They could refuse the work permit. And you have to make sure you're not working for an employer that's offering any striptease, erotic dances, escort services, etc. And that you give the officers all the documentation that they're going to need relating to your file. So the LMIA process and the offer of employment is going to be between immigration and the employer. It's going to be very objective, and they're going to be looking at the labor market situation and looking at if there's a need for a worker. They're going to be looking at the wages, all the stuff that we discussed before. But the work permit application is going to, when you submit the work permit application and you put that positive LMIA in there, that is just saying that it has been approved by the government, in the sense that your working is not going to affect the labor market. That is all it says. In terms of the work permit portion, when you have to submit your forms and you have to submit all your documentation, that is on you. So you have to make sure that you follow the rules with respect to if they require, like somebody generously told us about the notary public, if in your work permit packages, you need to follow any special instructions with respect to any extra steps you need to take, that is on you. That is not according to the employer. You have to make sure that your ducks are in a row with respect to applying for the work permit portion of it. Now, our job searching resource tools. So as I said before, Job Bank is the main site that you're going to want to use, because if employers are looking to apply for an LMIA, or they're open to applying for an LMIA for a temporary worker, you have Job Bank is mandatory that they have to advertise on. Is free to use, is Canada's government official government website, and it is beneficial for express entry and permanent resident applicants. So for example, like I said before, we have a specialized LMIA that is for express entry. And for persons that are candidates of express entry, they can also register on Job Bank. So for Job Bank, you can have employers can register on there to post their jobs. And as a job seeker, you can also register on Job Bank as well. But as a job seeker, to register, sometimes you can put in your express entry code, because when you apply for express entry, you put your profile in for express entry, you get a particular code, you can input that code in Job Bank, and Job Bank will make you visible to employers. So even if your intention is not to get an LMIA, and employers that might be looking for persons that are that are doing permanent resident processes, and they're not going to have to pay the LMIA fees, they may be open to search Job Bank and see you, and actually be able to offer you the opportunity to work for them, when you become a permanent resident, if your skills align with what they are looking for. So Job Bank also provides a matching service as well that is really good. And you have Indeed Canada, which is indeed.com. This is also free to use, and this pulls from different career sites. So sometimes if employers apply on Job Bank, sometimes it will also be on Indeed. So Indeed is also good. You have tons of jobs, but you have to be careful. Like for Job Bank, employers are going to have to put their information in there, and the jobs, the actual companies are going to be a little bit more legit. Indeed does have legitimate companies, I will say, but I mean, it is not monitored by the government. It's not a government search engine. It's not a government site. So you have to be a little bit more, careful, and you have to make sure that when you're applying on Indeed or any other job sites, that you're doing your cross-references, you're doing your research. So you search the company, you make sure you locate the company's website, you search, you search for these companies, like if you're preparing for an interview and you want to know everything about this company. We have Workopolis, which is also another really good site that is free to use as well. And Monster Canada and Ijabo, like some of these are free to use. You have other search engines, job searching engines that you could use as well that are, sometimes you might have to pay for a subscription, but these are the ones that I know that are free, and they're also good to use. Like they're Canadian job platforms, especially Workopolis and Monster Canada. And Ijabo, I think, is affiliated with a visa agency. So they might be open to LMIAs, they might be open to different processes that go with permanent residence. You could only ask questions. Now, when you're searching in Canada, you want to make sure that you're not ruling out the rural areas in Canada. Rural areas in Canada, when we say rural, we're not talking about the metropolitan cities like Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver. We're talking about more remote areas. So you want to, kind of look into those areas. Sometimes they're low competition. Sometimes those are where you could see the labor shortages more pronounced because, they're lacking enough persons to fill those jobs. You have a lot of pilot programs that help you to apply for permanent residence and set the foundation for you to apply for permanent residence in those areas. And you shouldn't fear to enlist professional help. So somebody asked about job agencies, which is amazing. Unfortunately, I just don't have the information for recruitment agencies that, actually help with LMIAs, but you can always do your own research. Like there are headhunters out there on LinkedIn and different job searching sites. There are recruitment agencies, there are career counselors, and there's some immigration consultants and lawyers, that may assist with the job searching aspect, or they could help with the with information, or they could always help with the work permit process, to make sure that you're on the right track. Now, you have to remember that nobody is allowed to charge you a fee or collect a fee directly or indirectly from any worker, including any foreign worker, for helping to find job placement in Canada or helping to find work in Canada is against the law. So you should not be paying anything to find jobs in Canada. Now, you could apply for jobs. I advise that you apply for jobs with a Canadian style resume. So you customize your resume and cover letter for every job, and you try to keep a Canadian style. I know that in Barbados, we use a lot of CVs, but in Canada, they usually use resumes, and you could Google the difference between the two so that you would know. You could research in-demand occupations in Canada and jobs that are in demand in specific provinces. Like if you're really looking, at working in Canada, you're interested in LMIA exemptions, sometimes is a little, you have to go a little deeper than just looking for jobs in Canada. Sometimes you have to be specific. So one of the first things I ask people is, where in Canada would you want to apply? Would you want to move? Would you want to settle? Because Canada is big, and we have our two-tier system of government and immigration makes it incredibly difficult, because between the federal government and the provincial government, we have over 100 immigration programs between the two. So, and the federal government is only a portion of that. So I always encourage persons to, look into LMIA exempt opportunities through the provinces and different provincial programs. So if you're, in this seminar and you're just interested in Canada as broad, you should look into the provinces and look into the culture and the type of industries in those provinces and see where you would want yourself and your family to settle. And that would be a great step in terms of looking for jobs, or in terms of deciding if you're going to study. It would really, really help you. So you have to actively stay on your job search and look for new immigration programs that come out, and beware of immigration scams. So like I said, it's all about information. Anytime you find that persons are reluctant to give information, or is not as detailed, or you can't find anything corresponding on any government websites like Job Bank or www.canada.ca, which is our government website, it is a red flag, right? Like you can't, like it's really not that easy to get employment in Canada, as we know now with the LMIAs and the LMIA exemptions and all the rules and what they have to go through. So anytime somebody's pitching a process that is overly easy, you need to make sure that you do your research and have your backup plans in place before you venture on your journey of coming to Canada. Now here I have some in-demand occupations, which are consistent with the in-demand occupations from yesterday. It's the same thing. And they vary from province to province. So they may have some provinces where, like I said, Nova Scotia registered nurses, that is a big field there. You have some provinces where they would need a lot more welders, they would need web developers. You have to do your research in terms of finding which province is best for you. And we have some provincial pilot programs in areas that I wouldn't say remote areas, but areas that are less populated. So the rural and northern immigration pilot is a good place to start. And those are based in northern Ontario, where we have like areas like North Bay, Sudbury, Thunder Bay, and then we have the Atlantic Immigration Program, which is for the Atlantic provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Islands, and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, like I mentioned before. So you should look into, like I said, is all about doing your research and really getting into the provinces. That can make a lot of difference. And then we have, like I think Consul General could give you more information, but we do have the international agreement between Barbados and Canada, where persons in the hospitality industry and also the agricultural workers can, access employment and access information about employment in Canada for certain industries. So you could definitely contact the Labor Department in Barbados to find out more about that for those that are interested. And for our take-home tips, my opinion has not changed that studying and working in Canada is studying in Canada especially is one of the best ways, especially with this labor market. Just imagine after COVID, during COVID, a lot of Canadians and permanent residents were laid off from their jobs. A lot of companies closed down. So we're anticipating like a slow pickup in the sense that like everything is difficult everywhere. So labor markets are in turmoil everywhere. And, we're just now opening up. So if these rules that we went through today standard, you could imagine just how hesitant employers are, to, put their neck out to have temporary workers, come to Canada. In this kind of, in this aftermath where, persons are desperately looking for jobs, even as Canadians and permanent residents. So, like I said, studying is one of the ways that you could, have everything in your own control, where you are able to work as a student, you're able to work after you're a student, you get an open work permit. It has nothing to do with any employer. It's completely open. You could work for any employer you want. And you have to make sure that you always validate your information through the government's website, canada.ca and Job Bank. And you must make sure that you're doing your rigorous research when you're looking for schools, even looking for jobs in Canada. Make sure you're cross-referencing, you're looking at Job Bank, you're researching those companies and you're vetting those opportunities. And you're making sure that you're coming to Canada and planning with the right authorization that you would need when you're here in Canada. And that brings us to the end of our seminar for today. And I'll open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Shontel. There are a couple, first of all, thank you for putting that up, because there were a number of people who they were asking for your contact information, and I said to them I would speak with you and find out how you were going to put this, but very happy that you've put it up. So people, her contact information is there, and you can reach out to her. Those who want to have one-on-ones, there were a couple of people who asked about that, and I said they would have to contact you directly, because as I would have said before, Shontel she has a private consultancy. So whereas she's doing this for us at the consulate, this seminar, she's doing this for us, So you get this information free right now, but anything that if you decide to contact her, that would be up to you and her as to what would be required thereafter. So just making sure that that's understood.
Yeah, thank you. So sorry, Council General.
Go ahead.
So persons that want to contact me, they could feel free to visit my website, which is here underneath the business card, is www.atkinsonimmigration.com. And there they'll be able to, know a lot more about the services I provide, and they could also book a consultation for that one-on-one discussion.
Great. There are a couple questions, literally maybe a couple too. So somebody asked, does it matter if you apply directly through Job Bank by creating an account for a job, or just apply to the email provided?
I don't think it matters much. Like, you just follow the instructions. Like some employers would want you to apply directly on the company site, and some employers you could apply through Job Bank. It wouldn't matter how you apply or where you apply, because the fact that you actually went on their profile, like, the government can see it anyway. So it wouldn't matter. Either or is good.
Okay, actually, no, that's the only question that's left. The other one was a comment. Terry Clark says, Ms. Atkinson is absolutely correct, 100%. So I don't know exactly at what point, but I'm figuring he's talking about everything, because that came in at 7:38, so less than 10 minutes ago. So he must have been talking about everything, or exactly what you said at that point in time. Yes. So I hope everybody has that information. And once again, we just want to let you know that at the consulate, we don't endorse any particular consultancy or anything like this. You choose. You feel free to choose, just as Shontel was saying, you do your research, and you feel free to choose where you want to go, how you want to do it, with whom would you want to get into some kind of arrangement or whatever else. But you need to do your own research, and we are just providing this information, this base for you then to go ahead and do your research. Okay. If there are no other questions, if nothing else, nobody's typing anything more into the chat. No. Okay.
I think everybody probably understands the LMIA system now. Probably.
I think so.
I'm hoping
yes.
so. I'm hoping so.
I am thinking that everybody's understanding that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our two-part immigration seminar. And I want to thank each and every one of you for, oh, sorry, somebody's asking, where can we go back to yesterday's recording? Yes, I will post that. Actually, all of you who would have registered, I will send you the link, because I would have had your email addresses. I will email you the link for yesterday's recording. You can find it on YouTube under the consulate's YouTube channel. So if you look for the Consulate General of Barbados at Toronto, we have a YouTube channel, and you will find the link for yesterday's seminar, part 1 of the seminar, on that channel. However, I will send you the direct link as well. I will email that to you. Today's session will also be available within, I would think within the next 2 hours, that will be uploaded as well. So you would be able to find that on our YouTube channel as well. So what I may do is wait and send you both links tomorrow, email out both links to all people who would have registered. Tomorrow I'll send you both links. But once again, I just want to thank each and every one of you, those who registered, those who joined us. I hope that it was as informative for you as it was for me. And I'm pretty sure a lot of us from the consulate, we get information, we get this bit of information because it's important for us to know as well. It's a part of our daily tasks to be able to guide people as to how they need to approach these matters. So this is good information for us as well at the consulate and at the High Commission. We do have our High Commissioner with us as well. And just want to remind you before we go that we have our cricket panel discussion coming up next week, Wednesday. So all of you cricket enthusiasts, please look out for the flyer. It's on our Facebook page as well as our Instagram pages, or IG and Facebook. you can get that information as to how to join us for the cricket discussion. We will have the Most Honorable Desmond Haynes, Mr. Jeff Brooms. We'll have Tiffany. Actually, we have a young lady, Tiffany Thorpe, who is studying here in Canada. She's on cricket scholarship. And she will be joining us for our discussion next week on cricket, lovely cricket. So once again, thank you very much. Look out for more of these discussions coming up. Hopefully, yes, this is an annual thing. So we may not have another immigration seminar till next year, but look out for information on our Instagram pages and Facebook pages. Thank you very much and do have a wonderful evening. Before I go, I'm sorry, is there anything, Consul Gibbs, that you would want to add, or is there anything, High Commissioner, that you would want to add?
Not from my end, Consul General. I think you did it quite well. I thoroughly enjoyed the seminar, the lecture, very informative, and so thank you, Shontel. But that's it for me.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much, Shontel. I'll take this opportunity now to just thank you on behalf of everybody. And we've had so much, we've had really good feedback about these immigration seminars, which you have conducted. Lots of good information was shared. So we thank you so very much. And there are people just coming through the chat telling us really good things, you know, have a great evening, so forth. Oh, wait, there's a question here. The person is asking, oh, wait a minute, I think that will be answered in the permanent residence when they look at the seminar from last year on permanent residence. Okay, yeah, so I can send that to them and they'll answer. Great. Thank you so very much. Again, ladies and gentlemen, do have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.